All right, we'll start with introductions. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Beth Ridley, a leadership and workplace culture consultant, and I help organizations improve how their people and teams work together better by really translating values like empathy and psychological safety and belonging into simple everyday behaviors. That's what I do. Carrie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. Well, good morning, everyone. I own an HR consulting firm as well, Kairos HR Consulting, and I work with clients of all sizes and just on a range of HR matters, from people strategy needs to development needs, all the way to those first level, like keep us out of trouble kinds of needs. Pretty much all aspects of the HR space. And I'm especially excited to co-facilitate this workshop with Beth today because the topic of empathy is just too often neglected as part of the leadership development and corporate culture. And I think development in this area just is a game changer for organizations. So again, welcome everyone. Beth is going to go ahead and kick things off.
Yeah, and so also just a little bit of like why Carrie and I wanted to partner on this. For me personally, last year as we were looking towards 2026, I always tap in with my clients and poll them and ask them, what are your top leadership competencies, workplace culture values that you really want to emphasize and prioritize in the new year? And I was really surprised that empathy was specifically stated and it was the most common thing stated across all of my clients. And so we'll get into a little bit about why that is. But really, it's, like empathy sounds good. I don't think it's necessarily new, but there's really more of an emphasis around really defining it, what it looks like tangibly on a day-to-day basis, and also how do we measure it so we can get serious about it. So, as you heard, Carrie and I do similar work, but very complementary. So we thought this would be a great topic to partner on. And so, yes, I will kick us off, but the first thing I want to do is a poll. So I do want to sort of gauge the audience and have a better understanding of how empathy is showing up in your organization. So hopefully, Carrie, can you see the poll here?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I see it, but I wasn't sure. Okay, so go ahead and select the answer that best applies to how empathy is showing up in your organization currently. Is it something that it rarely comes up? It's not really a focus. It's talked about occasionally, usually after some big dust up or an issue. Maybe leaders are encouraged to model it, but a little loose. Expectations aren't clear or consistent. Or maybe you are one of the lucky organizations and it's a formal priority. Um, so I'll wait till we get most answers in. We've got 10 out of the 16 people who've answered so far. And I can't wait to share the results. Are you guys seeing them live or no?
Yes, I
Oh,
am.
you
I
are
don't
seeing them
know about
live. Okay.
anybody else. Yeah,
Oh, okay, cool.
hopefully.
Okay, good, 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 good. I didn't know if I had to stop the poll in order to see the results.
We'll see.
Yeah, what I love about this
Oh,
is
yeah, they don't see them live. It looks like it from the chat.
oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna give it like just we're at about 77% participation. I'll give it one more second, and that's a good sample size. Okay, let me end the poll, and I'm gonna share the results. Bam. Can you see them there? Carrie, are you able to see them? Oh,
I am seeing them.
it looks
Yeah.
like Carrie Wilson said yes. We are able to
Great.
see them. Okay, perfect, good. So this is really awesome. This is like honestly a kind of more mature group here where there's a good portion that says leaders are encouraged to model it. I mean, that's I actually wasn't even expecting it to be sort of that sophisticated. So this webinar will actually be perfect because really what we want to do is help you close that gap between what empathy um, looks like in your day to day and also how to actually make it more real. And so the things that we're going to talk about, I'll cover what empathy is and isn't, just so that we have some clarity and a good baseline and shared understanding. A little bit about why it matters, and this is also going to get into what I hear my clients telling me, like why they're prioritizing it. Carrie then will cover core behaviors that reflect empathy in action. And then we'll end with three simple steps so that you can have more consistency across your leadership in terms of how it's demonstrated and measured. All right, so I'm going to jump in. I'm going to start with a simple definition that I use with my clients around what empathy is at work. And I usually say, you know what, at the end of the day, it's just the ability to understand and appreciate someone else's perspective, especially before you jump to a conclusion or deciding or even responding. And it really comes down to not just your spoken words, but your behavior. And it's something that signals, you know what? I appreciate your experience. I appreciate your point of view, and I'm trying to understand. It doesn't mean that you have to agree, but especially when I don't agree, that I'm trying to understand. So that's a simple way that I kind of frame empathy. Carrie will get more into the actual behaviors that make that up. But what I also really like to clarify is what empathy is not. I have a lot of clients in the Midwest. It looked like from chat, most of you are somewhere in Wisconsin. And so we tend to have this, you know what it is, that Midwest nice. And it's a great way to kind of get along, but it can be very superficial. And so, a lot of times clients will be like, oh, we're definitely empathetic. And they're really mistaking that for Midwest nice. And Midwest nice really means, we're just being too nice. And we're avoiding the difficult conversations out of a desire to emphasize just simply being polite. And that's actually not empathy. Believe it or not, when empathy is demonstrated well and practiced well, it makes those really difficult conversations easier and more productive. Also, a lot of times I have to clarify with clients, empathy is not letting people slide or lowering standards or expectations because you want to avoid, again, those difficult conversations that really drive a high level of accountability. And it doesn't mean that you're fixing people's problems to help make them more accountable. Again, empathy is really about leadership impact. And when you can demonstrate it well, it makes it easier to hold people to a higher level of standard. It does not dilute performance. It's really critical for enabling a higher level of performance. Carrie, anything to add from your vantage point?
I think you really nailed it there. It really is not an exchange for accountability. It needs to be supporting accountability versus the other. So that's
Yep.
great.
It's an accountability enabler. It really is when done right. Okay, and the research really shows this. So when organizations and when leaders in organizations really lead with empathy in a way that's felt and tangible, the results are quite obvious. So in the main reason why empathy is really a play for leaders to drive greater accountability, make difficult conversations go well, is because empathy builds trust. And trust is really needed, especially in moments of conflict. And people feel that you know, have that trust when you make the attempt to understand their perspective, and when they feel like the situation that they're in is considered fairly, even when you don't agree. When people have that sense of trust, they stay engaged, they're willing to speak up and take more ownership and invest in the hard work rather than pull back. The other thing about empathy is that it also reduces burnout. And that's because one of the biggest drivers of burnout is people feeling unseen or unheard. So when leaders can sort of acknowledge through empathy an employee's reality, and the reality these days is, there's so many competing priorities, there's a lot of change fatigue, there's personal strain that people bring when they come to work. When leaders can at least show that they understand that, it reduces that emotional load of having to carry all of this yourself. And that pressure just compounds and it leads to burnout. So when you have a high level of engagement due to the trust, when you have low burnout due to people feeling that they're understood and not alone, it really creates a sustainable work experience, which is what we need in this day and age because work is getting faster and there's more of it and it's getting more complex. So that's a little bit about why I find so many clients are saying, yes, we do want to prioritize empathy. It sounds like for most of you on this webinar, it's something that you've been talking about. It's something that it's encouraged, but now we want to get more serious about it because I think the workplace demands really require that it be a little bit more systematic. So a couple things that I hear clients saying around why empathy, as well as other interpersonal skills, are really mattering more. So one of them, interestingly enough, is around AI. And so all companies are starting to use AI a little bit more. A lot of the use of this new technology is more of an efficiency play, but we are finding that it's really automating some of those more repeatable tasks, some of that analytical work, and it's, freeing leaders up to ideally invest in more of that human side of leadership. And as AI is automating more of that technical work, it's an opportunity for leaders to really stand out. And if leaders are sort of used to maybe their brand is being the smartest one in the room, being a great subject matter expert, AI is no longer sort of giving them that edge. And so it's a great opportunity for leaders to really stand out by demonstrating these human skills that only humans can do well. Fostering that connection, inspiring people when times are hard, and that's actually what's needed because, the workplace is getting more difficult. It is getting more complex. There's a lot of demands, and frankly, we've probably tapped out in terms of all the benefits and the pay and all those other things that we can offer. It really comes down to, do we have a personal relationship of trust and respect where we can motivate people to lean in even when times are hard? Another reason that I see from clients is, well-being, mental health has now been normalized, and a lot of times leaders are front line with that. And I always get pushed back, hey, I'm not a therapist. I don't know what to do in this situation. If somebody is, sharing that they need support around mental health, and again, for the reasons that we talked about earlier, demonstrating empathy, the willingness to listen and not solve problems, but show a sense of understanding helps to minimize that pressure and strain that we all put on ourselves when we're carrying so much at work. Another reason, differences. The workplace is more diverse than ever. Those Gen Zers coming in with their bright ideas, I know it can be frustrating, but that's only one example of the diversity that's in the workforce. Leaders have to be able to bridge across differences, reach mutual understanding. Can only do that with empathy. Again, going back to that definition, demonstrating that you're willing to listen, hear someone, appreciate their perspective, not solve problems for them, not even necessarily agree with them, but show a sense of understanding. And then there's a lot of change going on, right? And so, how do you help people navigate change a little bit more gracefully? Empathy comes into play with that. So I think that data point there is really powerful. 86% of employees say empathetic leadership really does improve their morale, and we need more morale in this day and age. So I think this is a really great interpersonal skill to call out, to prioritize, to highlight, and to get smarter about how we get leaders to actually demonstrate it in their day to day. That's what I'm seeing with clients. Carrie, anything that you want to add? And I also have a poll that I want to do to see how this is resonating with them. But anything else to add, Carrie, before we move on?
I would just add, I mean, I think AI just really acts like an amplifier. It doesn't fix leadership gaps, it kind of exposes them. Wherever clarity or trust or intent are strong in organizations, the technology will accelerate and progress. But when they're not, people just feel that disconnect like almost instantly. And that human experience is just the real signal leaders need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. All right, well, I shared a lot about like what I think. What I want to do now is get a pulse on what you all think. So here's poll number two. Why does empathy matter most in your work right now? Obviously, you're on this webinar because you care about it. Most of you have said that it is a soft leadership expectation. So you can click all of the answers that do apply to you. We talked about work feeling more complex, fast moving. People need that sense of trust and clarity to stay aligned. Teams are leaner. Um, More engagement is needed from an emotional connection to the work. Prioritizing well-being and burnout. Empathy is a way to minimize burnout, and then the ability to bridge across differences. I'll give a few more minutes, and I'll wait till we're at least at 80% response rate, and then I'll share the results. All right, perfect. We're at 80%. So let me go ahead and share these results. So it looks like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. From a lens of well-being and burnout is really a big concern. Yes. I think it's wonderful that we're normalizing the conversation around employee well-being and mental health at work. And frankly, I think a lot of leaders, like I said, you are sort of the front line. It's not enough to just refer someone to your EAP. By the time you do that, it might be a little too late to catch something that can be addressed a little bit earlier. And as leaders and managers, you really know what your employees' day-to-day set point is. You're able to gauge if they're coming in a little bit later, if they're not as talkative. I mean, those are all signals that something might be off and something may need to be addressed. But if you're able to demonstrate empathy in a day to day, you just create that environment where people can feel like they can speak up and share and not wait until maybe it gets to a critical moment. So I think that's a fine reason why empathy is being prioritized. So that seems like it's number one. And then we'll just touch on the second one here, which is, yeah, work is more complex, fast moving. Um, yeah, and again, nothing beats that human personal connection to make sense out of work when it feels like it's a blur, to help people feel more connected to the real purpose and meaning of their work, so it doesn't feel just like an endless list of to-dos. Only humans can do that. And as Carrie will show when she breaks down empathy, empathy is a great way to kind of wrap up a couple of key interpersonal skills that result in empathetic leadership. So the one point that I'll end on, and Carrie, I'm going to turn the reins over to you, is really this. I think this sort of summarizes what I'm hearing from clients, why empathy is a priority, why now. When things feel uncertain, when things get emotionally charged, and a lot of times those two go hand in hand, when people are feeling that they're not on steady ground, I mean, we get maybe a little short-tempered, and it can come out in, a little bit of incivility, short-temperedness at work, and it can strain relationships. So people really rely less on what you know as a leader. It's not your subject matter expertise. It's not your title. They're really looking for someone who can make them feel understood, to mend those relationships when necessary, to be that bridge, and to really be that listener and create that safe space. Fair enough? All right. So hopefully we're pretty aligned on what empathy is and why it matters now. And Carrie, I'll have you walk us through. Actually, I'm going to pause. I did forget to say, if you have questions, please put them in chat or in the Q&A. I'm going to take a quick look and see if any questions came in chat. If not, now's the time to put them in, and we'll pause again before we end. But do feel free to go ahead and put your questions in chat or in the Q&A box, and I'll be monitoring those as well.
Yeah, I didn't see any, but
Okay, we'll keep going on. Hopefully we'll get some at the end.
All right. So we are kind of shifting into the practice of empathy and what that looks like in organizations. And we're going to start with just core behaviors. And when we talk about empathy at work, it's easy for it to kind of seem vague or intangible in some way. So we anchor empathy in these three core behaviors. The first being curiosity, which really shows up when leaders just pause their assumptions and ask before reacting, which I think Beth referred to a little bit early on. Instead of sort of jumping to conclusions, they ask things like, help me understand what's behind this, or what's been the hardest for you with this. Sometimes our natural inclination is like we just want to help and fix. And the way we show empathy is by really showing curiosity and asking those questions before we jump in with other things. The second behavior listed is listening. And this is not about listening to reply. How often have we been talking with someone and you can just tell they're like chomping at the bit to jump in with whatever they want to say? It's this is more about like listening to understand, and stopping that internal like brrr, just listen. And they leaders really can show empathy here when they just slow down, don't interrupt, when they and just when they resist the urge to immediately fix something. And that's why the curiosity helps with that, because then you can pause and ask the questions and it slows you down a bit. The third behavior listed is understanding, and it often shows up when leaders just reflect back on what they heard. It's an old, we've learned with communication techniques, check for accuracy, check for understanding, right? What I heard you say was XYZ. Does that sound accurate? And it again is another thing to slow down our temptation of just jumping in and answering. And often just that simple step alone can really de-escalate when there's tension. If someone comes in and they're, oh my gosh, okay, what I heard you say is this. Do I understand that correctly? And there's a calming process that can happen when you do that as well. Um, so yeah, go ahead, Beth.
Oh, Carrie, just one thing I wanted to jump in and say why I love these three simple components of empathy is because they can actually be practiced and demonstrated. And it means that empathy is not a personality trait. These are
No.
behaviors, and it's so funny. I remember way back early in my career, I worked with this guy. He was, and not to stereotype people who are very analytical, but he was an engineer and very analytical. And he said he was always practicing being empathetic. And I always thought that that's weird. Because I always thought, you're either an empathetic person or you're not. How can you practice it? But I think he was self-aware enough to know that maybe that wasn't his personality trait, but he would be specifically things that you could show up and actually practice them. So there's no excuse for not being empathetic because it really has nothing to do with your personality. And the last thing I'll say is understanding, I find with my clients is probably the hardest one. Again, I work with a lot of people that are more, they got into leadership because of their technical expertise, and particularly attorneys. They're sort of trained to always have an opinion. And so they get frustrated when it's like, well, I'm listening to them, but I don't agree. I have an opinion on that. And I tell them, think of winning as understanding. I mean, you win when you can demonstrate you understand them because you're that much smarter. You're that much closer to be able to,
Yeah.
have that relationship that you need to motivate and inspire. So I feel like understanding is one that's really hard for people because it's like, yeah, but I'm right.
Right.
So forget trying to be right. Being right is understanding someone's perspective, even when you don't agree.
Yeah, it's so true. We just need to change our mindset about empathy. We get caught up in the, oh, it has to do with how I feel. It's about shifting behavior. And I'll share a really quick example too, that just really stuck with me. I was recently talking with, I would say, a very senior leader, someone pretty highly respected. And in this sort of moment of vulnerability, he's like, I'm not actually sure I feel empathy for others. I feel sympathy and I care about them. But empathy just doesn't seem to come as naturally to me as it seems to for others. I don't really like feel what they're feeling. And I said, well, that's actually okay. Just what Beth said. It's like empathy at work is not about what you feel, it's about what people experience with you. It's an experience is shaped by behavior. So the great news is this is about behavior. It's not about how you feel on the inside as you're showing empathy. And our behavior is something we can control and be intentional about with these types of activities. So
Oh, I like that one. It's not about how you feel, it's about how others experience working with you. I wrote that one down.
exactly. These behaviors don't require a personality change. Anybody, excuse me, can learn these behaviors or skills. They can be learned, they can be practiced. But even when organizations can name the behaviors, empathy often still doesn't stick, which is what the next slide gets into, these common mistakes that we see. And one of them being one and done training. It's a common mistake to treat empathy like a one-time training topic. People will attend a training, like a workshop, like even today, let's say, and it makes so much sense in the moment, and maybe some ahas come out of it. But then, the workday takes us over. And so, as we all know, it's not as simple as attending a workshop if you really want to make change in your organization, but it's a great start. And there's more that needs to come. Another mistake listed here is introducing like the language of empathy without actually changing behavior. So sometimes leaders learn the words to say, but not what to do differently when things get really tense and uncomfortable or in those really difficult moments. Um, and another thing here, I'll just call out too, metrics are just another consideration. Many of us do engagement surveys, for example, right? Well, how great are we really at the action planning and then following through? Um, and those are also ways of showing empathy. We heard you. Let's work on a plan together. And oh, here are the results of the plan. We actually did what we said we would do. We often fall short on that part, which is the opposite of empathy, right? Um, so the truth of it is, empathy disappears under pressure if it's not reinforced when it matters most. And this is why reinforcement and repetition are just really critical. And research even tells us that sustained behavior change is like 5 times more likely when learning is reinforced over time. It's all about that sustainability. Um, and it has to live in real conversations, not just training decks. Beth, anything else to add there?
No, I think that's the main thing. I think the main thing is break it down into simple behaviors that we can agree on and demonstrate, and then find ways in your day-to-day moments, one-on-ones, team meetings to keep demonstrating those behaviors. And people need a long, um, runway, you know what I mean? They need to experience these same behaviors over and over again to be convinced that they experience you as an empathetic leader. It's not just a once during your employee retreat. It's a daily, consistent, so that they see your behaviors and there's integrity behind it, after a lot of repetition.
And it seems real. It's not just steps we go through. And so
Mhm.
the question becomes, how do we build empathy into everyday work in a way that actually lasts, which gets into the next slide, right? Um, So the first thing you do, and this is something that Beth and I work on with our clients, is establishing a baseline, right? And this doesn't have to be like, imagine you're going back to your company and you want to start something. Obviously, we're available to help you with any of this, but you want to start with just capturing. It may not be like a long survey, just a few, 3, 5, maybe 5 focused questions that surface how empathy is showing up in key moments, like how does it show up when feedback is given, or how is it showing up in moments of conflict or decision making. Some examples, which are on the next slide. We can just for example survey questions. My manager takes time to listen and understand my perspective before responding or making decisions. Second one, leaders here ask questions to understand what's behind an issue rather than jumping to conclusions. That gets at those behaviors of, jumping in. Third one, when concerns are raised, leaders follow up or take action in ways that show they took the conversation seriously. And these types of questions give us the data we need, because it really measures behavior. It doesn't measure intent. It's all about those behaviors in the workplace. So
Yeah.
on the next slide,
And
Excuse
Carrie,
me. Oh,
can I add
yeah,
one here?
absolutely.
One other one to add is because sometimes, we're thinking sort of the absence of empathy. And a lot of times we do have empathy present in the workforce that we may not just pay attention to or even like highlight, even though it's there. So, a question to add that I just thought of is when empathy is working well on your team, what do we notice happening? And that might, some of it is new behaviors that you want your leaders to demonstrate, but some of it is also existing behaviors that foster that sense of empathy that you want to continue to double down on. So, a question you can ask is when empathy is felt on the team, what's happening? Why?
I love that because it is, yeah, it flips the script, and gives us something to use as a model. So that's
Positive
great.
reinforcement.
Yeah, that's great. There was a quick question around,
Oh,
are we receiving the presentation or we're sending it out afterward?
yes, I can do that as well as the
Yeah,
recording. So, yes.
fantastic. Um, so on the next slide, continuing on the sustainable empathy practices line, after we obtain data from a short survey, you really, even if it's just you as a leader with your team can do this, even if it's not the whole company, right? You can get your team together around empathy, and align together on what empathy means for them. And it means like clarifying what empathy looks like in one-on-ones and in meetings and moments of disagreement and why empathy matters. And then finally, the team can just agree to like one shared habit. You start small, pick something that matters. Not everything all at once, right? Just one behavior tied to curiosity or to listening or to understanding those core behaviors I outlined in the beginning. Because small, consistent habits are really what actually drive the change. And teams can then follow up, maybe a month down the line or 2 months down the line and check in as a group. How did that one shared habit improve or how did we do on that? And maybe select another habit to work on. So it just takes like building blocks like that for sustainability. Okay. Before we transition, Beth, into talking about the one pager that we have,
Mhm.
any additional thoughts to share regarding, common mistakes or how you work with clients on this type of thing?
Yeah, and I mean, I think to your point, it really is coming down with the one shared habit. So I'll share a little bit about how I support my clients in this work, and then Carrie, I'd love to hear from you as well. But one of the things that I do, I've got sort of two things. One is in AI-powered simulation that puts up a real common scenario. Clients can actually choose their own scenario. One that's really popular is how a leader provides feedback, like constructive feedback during a performance review. When you have an employee who feels like they're really great and strong at work, but they are struggling themselves with their collaboration, and how do you give that feedback without the employee feeling demoralized? A lot of times, again, we default to that Midwest nice, which is just really not helpful. And if we can approach that conversation with a little bit more empathy, you can give that more constructive feedback and get alignment to holding someone to a higher standard in a more productive way. Um, as you were saying, Carrie, demonstrating empathy in times of stress and strain is really hard. We get nervous and we're never given that objective feedback on how we're showing up. It's just awkward and uncomfortable,
Right.
and we don't get it. AI can help us do that. I do a simulation, you run through it in your own time, you respond to an employee in a real situation, and you get your objective results at the end. How did you do? Where did you demonstrate curiosity, listening, understanding? Where did you miss opportunities to do that? And it helps to bring a little bit of self-awareness around this particular interpersonal skill that it's really hard to get that objective view otherwise. So that's one way that I help clients. And then the other way is again, shared simple habits. Most leaders will have one-on-one, or sorry, monthly team meetings. So I give them short 10-minute guides to tee up this conversation around empathy. What does it mean for our team? What does it look like? And one shared habit that we can do together. And again, it's short enough, it's simple enough, it doesn't require taking time outside of work. You weave it into your existing workflow as a continuous conversation. And then you're all sort of working on this together, holding each other accountable. You're clear on what it looks like, and you're keeping it going until it becomes just the way that you work because it becomes a shared habit. So those would be the two ways: simulations to get an objective view on how you show up as a leader and other people experience you. And then how do you engage your team in these ongoing conversations?
Hmm, I love it.
Carrie, what do you do?
Well, I just loved your answer so much. I especially loved the AI simulation piece because AI cannot show empathy. It's not human. It can't create the way that humans can create. A lot of things AI can't do. But that's pretty cool, actually. And that's something I haven't done yet. So I'm definitely going to be checking into that. But really, what I do first is help leaders, translate empathy into some specific usable behaviors, how they, listen and respond in difficult moments, how they give feedback and follow up and get very concrete about what it looks like in different scenarios. But second, coaching managers to apply empathy in real business situations, balancing care with accountability, which we've talked about a couple of times. So empathy really strengthens performance rather than replacing it in any way. And then third, I help organizations embed empathy into leadership expectations and ways of working. So it does become ingrained in the culture. This can be done many different ways. It can be done through core competencies and all sorts of ways. It's not an individual trait. It needs to be part of the culture. And the results really are that leaders are both human and effective, and teams feel heard when delivering results, and it really can move the needle. So I always start with the assessment and then move through the coaching.
I
So
love that. Yeah. And I mean, it's
yeah,
all needed, right? It's at the organizational level, team level, and the individual one-on-one level as well.
exactly. And
Um,
oh, go ahead.
no, no, that's all.
I was just going to say it's a really exactly what the one pager
Mhm.
on our next slide is designed to support those practical behaviors that can be used before, during, and after real conversations, which we're going to be sending everyone. Actually, it'll show up in the chat.
I just
If
put
you
it in
click
the
on it.
chat.
Yay! Um, but until you can just use this as a reference, have it around near your work area, or just reference it. But it gives for example, I won't talk through all of it, but looking at setting the stage really when you're talking about one-on-ones, like don't have your phone around, set it down, mute it, whatever. No screens when you're in a one-on-one. I know some of us like to take notes when we're on a one-on-one, but the listening part is really critical when it comes to empathy. No multitasking. Don't work on other things while someone is in a one-on-one with you. Some of us have been through that, and it just doesn't feel like the person's focused on us, right? Don't allow interruptions. Someone knocking on your door while you're on a one-on-one. I've been guilty of saying, "Come in," and that is another way of just telling someone that, well, that's more important than you right now. And so that's not showing empathy. So each of these things, I'm slowing the pace when emotions are high, slowing down, asking those questions. And there are some examples there. Tell me more. Say more about that. I want to understand it. What are some of the barriers you're facing right now? Rather than having answers every time. So we talked about that. Phase two really gets into some of the dialogue, some specific things that can be said or asked that really can make a difference in terms of, just a person's experience of you or leaders in general. And then at the bottom, this gets into more like when you're really addressing performance. Um, some leaders will say, this outcome isn't where it needs to be. You really need to figure this out. You're on your last legs. Like, you need to figure it out. Versus, this outcome isn't where it needs to be. I believe you're capable of more. What are some of the barriers? How can we work to, for your success? It's just like, again, flipping the script and holding someone accountable at the same time. So, yeah, so you can take some time with this. And again, it's available to you in the link if you haven't already downloaded it. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
that,
I love it. It's awesome both things. And Carrie, you had said earlier, choose one and just start practicing that until it becomes second nature. Then maybe you layer on a second. And so even your least empathetic seeming leaders can actually do this so that they are experienced by others as being more empathetic than not. Yeah. Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And you'll see at the bottom too, our contact information is there. So if
Oh,
any of you are interested in talking further with Beth or with myself, you can just find that information right at the bottom of the document. So,
and
and
it's right here too. So
so
take
if
a
you're,
screenshot of that. Mm,
yeah. So we're happy to help and continue the conversation.
excellent. Any questions? You please put them in chat or in the Q&A. I'm looking at chat, Carrie, right now, and I didn't see
Me
any other than,
too.
yes, we will share the slides in the recording. And then I'll just check the Q&A real fast to see if anything came up there. No, nothing.
Oh, mm.
No. Okay. Hey, we wanted to keep this short, sweet, and simple because we know people are busy. If you have questions, if you want to stick around, feel free to. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's a wrap. And if there's anything that Carrie or I can help you with your individual leaders or with your organization or teams, please reach out and let us know. And we're getting some thank yous. So thank
Yeah.
you, everybody, and
Thanks for
enjoy
being
the rest of
here.
your week. Yeah, thank you for coming.